Good evening, everyone. How are you? Yeah. I would just like to say I love that enthusiasm. Thank you, Mandy. That was Mandy, right? Yeah. Okay. I wasn't sure if it was Mr. Wenstrom or Mandy that was letting out the howl. Yeah. Oh, we do that all the time wherever we go. Yeah, we just signed her name. Well, thanks so much for joining us, my PTSA Council friends. So it's great to have you here, and we are so pleased to be able to share this information with you. So a couple of quick notes before we get started. We will be offering an opportunity to have a couple of virtual forums as well. So if folks from your PTA or your school community ask about that, we will have at least a couple of those where we'll have them maybe at different times of the evening so that people can join us, hear the presentation, and then have a process for answering Q&A, whether through the chat or other venues. So there will be other opportunities. And then we also want to offer an opportunity for any of us to join one of your PTA meetings. If you'd like to have us join you for an abbreviated version of this, we would be very, very happy to do that as well. So I'm Andrea Oquist, in case you can't tell behind the mask. Very proud to be the superintendent in Livonia Public Schools and excited to spend some time tonight talking with you about the future of our wonderful district. With me is Allison Smith, our Director of Finance, Phil Francis, our Director of Operations, and Stacy Jenkins, who is our Administrative Communications right here. So Allison is going to go ahead and get us kicked off. We're a small enough group that if there's any point in time that you want to stop us and ask a question, just flag us down and we'll do that. We are going to record the presentation, and then we'll also do a formal Q&A at the end. Allison.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me all right? Okay, wonderful. So to get started, I wanted to give you some background to understand why are we even talking about a bond proposal. So just going to spend a minute explaining how schools are funded here in the state of Michigan. It goes back to 1994 to Proposal A. The two main objectives of Proposal A was to lower property taxes and to shrink the gap between highly funded districts and the lower end, and to try to bring that together so that the saying goes that the zip code doesn't determine the type of education that you get. So that was largely successful. A little closer? Okay. We'll try that. A little better? Okay. So what Proposal A didn't do, though, it didn't address facility needs. And that was left up to two funding mechanisms, either a sinking fund or a bond proposal. And I didn't have it on the slide, but also just to mention, Proposal A was never calibrated to the actual cost of educating a child. In essence, they had a pot of funding. They knew how many students were across the state of Michigan, and that's how they came up with the funding. So on another day, we could talk about the Michigan Finance Research Collaborative, which was an in-depth study done to see what is the actual cost to educate a child. And so that's something that school districts across the state of Michigan are working with their legislators on, trying to get some additional funding for schools. So sinking fund millage. A sinking fund millage can be used for the upkeep of our buildings. It can't be used for staff salaries or for textbooks. It's unlike a bond in that it's the money is raised and then spent as you go. And so we were fortunate enough to pass a sinking fund back in 2019. That brings in about $7 million a year for the school district. And we use it for 4 main projects, which I'll illustrate on the next slide. The big 4 are paving projects for boiler replacements and for new roofs. And with this new sinking fund that passed in 2019, we also now have the ability to use it for instructional technology. So it doesn't bring in enough to take care of all of our instructional technology needs, but it's nice to have that extra pot of funds that we can go to if needed. We just took our first purchase to the board this fall, and we used up the remaining dollars that we had in the 2013 bond, and then what that bond didn't cover, we tapped the sinking fund for. The other option that school districts have to raise funds for facility needs is through the passage of a bond. Unlike a sinking fund, this money is kind of like a mortgage. We sell bonds and then we get money up front so that we can tackle larger projects in a quicker amount of time. Let's see, similar to the sinking fund, this can't be used for staff salaries or for textbooks. It's really for your upgrading your facilities. We can use it for instructional technology, school buses, things like that. The community did pass a bond back in 2013. I'll turn it over to Mr. Francis in a few minutes, who's going to go over some of the projects that we were able to accomplish with our 2013 bond. We wanted to share some comparisons with you of what we're seeing across school districts here in our area. For some, 2013 might feel like that wasn't too long ago, but for others, that feels like ages ago. When we look at some neighboring districts, we can see in Novi, they went for a bond the year after us, and they've already gone out for a second bond since we did ours. When we look at Plymouth Canton, they went for a bond in 2013, and then they went for a bond again in 2019. So we can see this is kind of the trend with school districts. It's not waiting, such a long time between these requests so that we can stay up on the needs across the district. This next slide, I wanted to share with you the passage rates that we're seeing with ballot proposals that are no new taxes. We can see, especially over the last few years, it's up in the 90s to 100%. So really supported by our communities. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Mr. Francis, and he's going to walk us through what we were able to do with our 2013 bond.
Good evening, everybody. Really important foundational information regarding the funding of schools. And I think a couple of takeaways that I always end up shaking my head, even if only silently to myself, when Allison says things like, Proposal A, the funding that occurred out of that was never actually calibrated to what it costs to educate a child. They just took the pot of money they had and said, let's divide this up. It really didn't research what it cost to educate a child. And I always just feel like that's the legacy that we work through. The other piece I always hear when she says her statements about school funding is the piece about how this current school funding model does not take into account any facilities needs of a district. Seems a little crazy because you have these places that our children come to, and we need to make sure that our children are in safe, warm places. So it's a really good foundation that Allison has given us. Now, talking about the 2013 bond, those of you, some of you here might be wildly familiar with all of the work that was done through that. Some of you may be newer to the district, or at least newer with your children in the district and not know as much. So I don't want to spend a ton of time on it, but I do want to give a little bit of background for the sake of having the foundation of the discussion. So back in 2013, we had not passed a bond in the district of this magnitude for many, many years. I think it was over 2 decades. There's quite a bit that needed to be done, and going into it, the board knew that they couldn't fix everything with the dollars they were going to have. You had to look at the facility needs and go for the biggest bang for your buck in the largest amount of areas and spaces that we could, which is what occurred. There were major renovations to classrooms, top to bottom. Any of you familiar with your children's classrooms, you walk into it now, from the tile on the floor to the lights in the ceiling, the sound system, the technology that's in those rooms, all of it was redone through the 2013 bond, and it was just a beautiful transformation from classroom to classroom. But not only in the classrooms, we were able to build the PAC we're sitting in right now, this Performing Arts Center here at Stevenson High School, and at Churchill, the complete remodeling and renovation of their PAC, that was part of it. We had quite a bit, and it's something that's always ongoing, are things like electrical, plumbing, lighting, HVAC. Those are the types of things that there's such a tremendous amount across the district. We're talking about a 36 square mile district with nearly 3 million square feet of facilities. When you start talking about working on electrical and plumbing and different things like that, it's literally its own labyrinth within each building, with the HVAC piping, with the electrical that runs through them. There's multiple panels. There's all kinds of work. We tackled quite a bit of that in the 2013 bond, but certainly was not able to tackle all of it. Buses. We mentioned the classroom technology, but also safety, security, the secure vestibules, all of those types of pieces, video cameras. We have the furniture that, student desks, tables, chairs, flexible furniture in spaces at the school buildings. So many items. Again, I don't want to go through them line by line, but it's just that foundation of what was the 2013,000, I'll say it correctly, the 2013 bond, and what were the things that were done? Quite a bit, but just understand not 100% of the need at the time. So those needs still exist. Some pictures. Pictures are always lovely, especially when we're not familiar with all of our 23 schools that we have. The front entryways, here's some before and afters. The arch at every building, including central office, has become sort of the tag of our entryways, but the real meat of it, as beautiful as the archway with the lights and the piers and the benches are, is really that secure vestibule. It's an area that folks come in when they visit. They only have two choices when they enter. One, get buzzed in because they're okay to come in. It's a parent, it's a vendor, it's a whatever after being identified, or they can turn around and leave. This should be the only entry point in our buildings for the safety and security of our children and our staff. We went through quite a bit. You can see some of the renovation scope on there. So many things that are both visual up front and hidden and important with regard to the behind the scenes with mechanical engineering, etc. Some of our areas, we have the Stevenson PAC in the upper left, the Churchill PAC in the middle. Again, we're sitting in the Franklin PAC. To the right upper, you see a classroom at Churchill High School. It's an art room, and the new office where Deb actually is familiar with that area right now. All the offices are just dynamite. They're all unique in their own way, but they're just a beautiful area. And a couple of classrooms here at Stevenson and at Garfield Community School, a GSRP room. Some more pictures of PACs and entryways. And of course, some of the items that the bond did that I haven't mentioned, I'm glad I see the picture there. I mentioned flexible furniture, and Allison said buses are a novel item. Things like school buses, which are incredibly important, and we put many, many miles on, those were purchased, many were purchased through the 2013 bond, but also things like, I know it doesn't sound really thrilling, but floor scrubbers for our custodial staff. Items that will last us many years and help keep this investment up to date and clean. The bottom left has an example of a play structure at one of our elementary playgrounds. All of the playgrounds had the opportunity to order I shouldn't say either. There's a little bit of uniqueness based upon what they currently had, but almost all of them were able to purchase through the bond a large multi-event playscape like is pictured here, and also individual events. So anybody here familiar with the elementary schools and the new playground items that were purchased? Look, John raises his hand right away. Yes. Those were so exciting when they were going in, and I know a couple of places. I got over to Grant right after it was installed, and to see the kids just so excited to be out there and playing on them. It was a long time coming, and we were very excited to put them in. And you see some flexible furniture pieces, the hokey stools in the upper left, and other unique pieces of furniture for students. So, throughout the 2013 bond, one of the things I'm trying to emphasize here is the board laid out a certain scope of work that they wanted the district to have completed throughout the years between 2013 and 2019. and the things that were laid out were accomplished. We are so excited and proud of what got accomplished through the 2013 bond fund. And while it is beautiful and it was important and it will bring value and has brought value and comfort and education and all of those things to our students, there is still more yet to do. So these are some of the items that, based upon a facility plan, and I'm going to talk about that in just a moment, that the district has kept now ever since the early 2000, call them the 10s, in 2011, 2012, created a facility plan, which I'll get to, but there were items on there that the board looked at and said, we want to do those, but we understand we don't have enough money from the 2013 bond to do everything. So items were prioritized, and some were left for future renovation. And some of those that come to mind right away for probably many of you are places such as our library media centers. Those were untouched, planned, but still untouched throughout the 2013 bond projects, along with our kitchens and many of our serving lines. Those are original equipment for the most part in all of our buildings in the kitchens. Our media centers, early 90s, I believe, many of them were done. And that's now been obviously, 30 years since those were done. And we want to reimagine those. We want to make a space with input from media specialists, teachers, students, etc., to make a space in our media centers that invite students in for 21st century learning. And they can be reimagined and reinvented. Other items like air conditioning in our learning spaces. Some have them, most don't. Computer lab spaces were not done at the secondary buildings. The science lab casework and tables. I mentioned the kitchens. Doors and hardware, many were done, but not all of them. Think about nearly 3 million square feet. How many doors does that come out to? There are so many, and all of them couldn't be done at one time. So something else we still need to change out with original equipment that we have. The field houses that are now almost 20 years old in the 3 high schools, they are wonderful areas for our athletic teams, for our students in PE and physical classes, physical education classes. They are also used not only by our sports teams, but also the community and different groups that rent them out. After 20 years, they absolutely need attention. We want to make sure we're maintaining that investment from 2 decades ago and keep them state of the art. The high school competition gyms and locker rooms, they need a little loving. If you've ever gone into one of the locker rooms in one of the high schools or middle schools, you would probably immediately recognize that they need a little bit of loving in there. Lights, original benches from the 50s and 60s, a whole array of items that need to be updated for our students. And the pools and pool locker rooms for our high schools have quite a bit of original equipment in them to this day as well. Can everybody read that? I'm just kidding. This is what I was talking about, the 10-year facility plan. We have been keeping up with this. We try to do it twice a year, winter and summer. And this is a very detailed plan with every building having its own tab, and within that tab, a myriad of items that range anywhere from the roof, to the parking lot, to the boilers, to the pipes, to everything inside that building. It takes quite a bit of time, as you might be able to imagine, to sit down and do the entirety of the district on those updates. But the fact that we have it, the real bulwark that was done, the real heavy lifting was done years ago, over a decade ago, or about a decade ago, to get it up and running. And now we keep it, maintain it, and want to preserve and maintain it for the future so that at any point we can let the board know, here's our needs. Here's what's most pressing right now. Here's what we know is coming up, but we have a plan for it, et cetera, et cetera. A very quick example, the roofs on all of these buildings across the district. We've started summer roofing replacements, started a few years ago at Holmes, and have been each summer methodically going through a plan to replace all of the roofs on all of our school buildings each summer at a time, and we're using the sinking fund to do that. We know exactly how old and how many square feet each roof is. We also have a third party that came out and did an assessment on those roofs. So this is the type of detail we want to have and maintain so that we can say, the worst roof right now is X. Let's do that one next. We have that information. And we have that with our boilers. We have that with our classrooms. We know the square footage in each building. We know what air conditioning units were replaced and what hasn't been replaced but needs to. So I don't want to harp on this, but it's super important. As important as understanding the foundation for funding in schools, this is the foundation for where we get our information and say, we know we have needs still. And we will continue to keep this up to date so that we know what we need, when we need it, and where we need it. Anything I missed on that? I know we've talked about it before. So where do we get that number of $186 million? Well, for one thing, you can't just pick any number you want. It has to work out with regard to the mills, et cetera. But when we talked about, before any of that, before you talk about how does it work out financially and how does it work out with the mills, we sat back and said, well, hold on. We know for a fact that the projects from that 10-year facility plan in years 0 through 3, we break them up like that. 0 to 3, 4 to 6, 7 to 10 years out. So we have it out through 10 years, and we put escalating costs on that because if we're going to do a roof today versus doing a roof 8 years from now, it's going to be more expensive 8 years from now. So within 0 to 3 years, we've got $102 million worth of work that we know is basically needed in the next couple of years. And then the next 4 to 6 years, we have $108 million of work based upon our 10-year facility plan that we keep tabs on. We also have identified about $29 million worth of technology needs. We are always needing to be in a recycle is not the right word, a replacement cycle, put two words together there. The replacement cycle for technology that your children use, you probably know it at home, we know it, they don't last forever. They have a lifespan based off the manufacturer, so we have to be in that cycle. Altogether, those three lines are $239 million. I'm sorry, I said it wrong. I got ahead of myself. The overall identified needs over the next 6 years, yes, I'm sorry, it's 239. But we know that we have a sinking fund that brings in the $7 million a year. So over that 6-year period, that's $42 million. And we know right now that we're using that for sure on things like roofs and boilers and pavement and other emergency items. So take that $42 million off that 239, and we land at $197 million of additional funding needs.
Mr. Francis, would you, so that $102 million, that $108 million, would you flip back to the prior slide?
Yes.
So I just want to make sure that we live and breathe this each day, so I want to make sure this makes sense, because this is a really important element of understanding how we landed with our recommendation to the board that we did. If you look at what is the first, second, third, fourth column, it says critical needs 0 to 3 years. And you have every school listed, and you come down, and you land on just over $102 million. So this is the summary page for what is a multi-inch thick document that lays out the needs in every single school. The next column is the 4 to 6 year column. So what do we know will need to be done at each of those schools, and how much will that cost? When you bring that down, you get to the $108 million. So one of the things that we're going to talk about in a few minutes is the importance of fiscal stewardship and being so cognizant of any time we come to our community with an expressed need or an identified need for our schools, we need to be certain that that is based on clear research that we have done and clear evidence of what is needed in our schools and in our district. So I just wanted to put those two together, and that's why on that summary page, you can flip back to where you were, that's how we come up with the needs that exist. Again, those needs don't go away if we don't do them. Some of them we certainly will address. We address the highest priority needs through our sinking fund, but we also knew that based on that long-term facility plan, we've had a pretty good idea for a number of years of where we would need to be as far as funding in order to stay current with our facilities.
Perfect. Perfect. Very, very nice. And then when you do the math through, we've landed at the need of approximately $197 million over the next 6 years. And Allison, what's the general life of a bond, would you say?
Anywhere from 10 years, I say all the way to 30 years.
That's the life of the repayment cycle, but how long do most districts actually have projects for?
I think when you look back, like you can see the consistency of how often they go, probably about 6 years, I'd say is average.
If you remember that slide back there that Allison was showing with our neighboring districts, you see that type of cycle of staying on top of your facility needs throughout the district. And I think at this point, I'm turning it over to Mrs. Oquist.
All right, thanks so much. So we're going to talk a little bit about why now and some current considerations. So one of the first things that we took a look at was how could we take a look at when we had bond debt rolling off for our district and for our community, and when would there be a window of time when we could sell additional bonds, garner those dollars that are needed to meet the needs of our long-term facility plan, but do that without any increase in taxes. We have that window in May of 2021. So Mrs. Smith has worked very closely over the past few years with our financial advisor. She and I and our team have spoken about this for the past several years now, really from as we were still in the last bond, looking at our sinking fund and then moving toward this bond request. We really wanted to take a look at a window that would not increase the tax rate, the debt rate, for any of our community members, but that we would be able to take advantage of that window when we had debt falling off, and we would be able to recapture some of those dollars for that reinvestment in our schools. So in this case, the tax rate would remain the same for residents and businesses without any additional dollars. However, we would be able to infuse our schools and therefore benefit our community by garnering approximately $186 million in funds to be able to address those facility needs. Really, when we think about that reinvestment and we think about the ability to not only maintain our facilities, but continue to grow our programs and offerings for our students, how important it is to do that. You may in a district be able to go a year, 2 years, 3 years with letting some things go and perhaps not addressing them. When you begin to do that over 5 years or 10 years or more, that begins to show. It begins to show not only in your facilities, but in what you're able to offer and provide for your students. So again, this is our only window of opportunity for a no new taxes bond issue. If we chose to go later, for instance in November, it would be considered an increase at that point in time because the tax levy, the debt rate, the millage rate will have fallen, and in order to raise the same amount of funds, 6 months later, we would have to increase taxes. Anything you want to add on that, Mrs. Smith? The second piece is really something that is very essential to our board as well as to our district administrative team, and that's really that fiscal stewardship. We have seen a consistent growth of our district fund balance. We are currently at about 20%, Mrs. Smith, and that is really at the upper end of the Michigan School Business Officials' recommended rate of 15 to 20% for a district fund balance. We are very pleased to have been able to gradually grow that to increase financial stability within our district. We've been able to do that while also growing programming and reducing class size. We have recently been able to refund some of our bond debt, which has resulted in taxpayer savings of over $15 million. When was that completed, Mrs. Smith?
October?
This past October. We've received the highest rating on our district audits and a very positive bond rating as well. Those are correlated with the financial stability and the fiscal stewardship in your district. We've also, and I'll show you an example of this, completed and produced quarterly dashboard reports throughout the entire bond. Do you want to speak on those for a moment, Mr. Francis?
Each quarter, so obviously at the end of the first quarter, hopefully, generally we try in the early part of the second quarter, and so on and so forth. Plant Moran Cressa, they are the owner's rep. They have been hired by the district, and they have a financial background, they have an engineering background, an architectural background, their employees do, and they work on behalf of the district. They come in and do a dashboard report that gives basically where we're at. We look at the funds, the projects, where we're at, and what's upcoming. So throughout the bond, it gives the board and the community a snapshot, if you will, of where we're at in our project and where the dollars are going. Are we staying on track with what we had planned to do? Are we staying on track with costs? If we go back in time to the 2013 bond, as you go through that bond period, based upon the economy at the time, there were larger savings early on because the market wasn't as hot. The country was coming out of that long recession. And then as you move through, construction got a little hotter. So it keeps the community and the board up to date as to where we're at, both again, from a project standpoint and where the dollars, how much of the bond has been spent.
And one of the reasons why we share that is because that really is part of that public transparency of how these dollars are used and how they're managed. We also chose to have an annual bond audit. It is only required that you complete a bond audit at the end of your audit and then once at least 3 years in between. We've chose to do that every single year by an independent auditor as well. And then finally, we really did take a look at that process of the districts around us and the pattern in which they would work on keeping up their facilities and taking a look at their bond issue patterns. And really one of the things that we feel is so important is our ability to continue to think forward, to continue to think for growth and innovation and be a destination district, not only to retain our families who are here, but also to recruit new families to our community. So that is those three areas were certainly significant considerations for our administrative team as well as our board.
I just wanted to jump in. You asked if there's anything to add, and I will make note, we kind of glossed over in the window of opportunity, talking about the term of this bond that we're requesting. Again, as Ms. Oquist said, we're always trying to be good stewards of the resources that our community has entrusted to us. Because we had been without a bond for so long, for the 2013 bond, we did a 30-year term bond that garnered us the $195 million. Again, that had been, it had been a long time since we had done a bond of that size, so that really was the right decision at the time. But what we were working on this time was, again, trying to look at what could we do that will, in essence, cost us the least, but get us what we need. So, as Mr. Francis said, between the two columns, between the projects between 0 and 6 years plus our technology needs, we're talking about $197 million worth of identified needs. And you might have noticed on this slide, we're talking about a bond that will garner us $186 million. So we're still, again, trying to be good stewards. We still recognize we're going to have to prioritize projects. We won't necessarily get to everything, but again, we want to try to balance being good stewards. When we go with a shorter term bond, like the 20-year term, that means it'll be less interest costs for taxpayers to have to pay back to borrow those funds. So again, I just didn't want to gloss over that. I wanted to explain why we're doing the 20-year term this time as opposed to the 30-year term we did the last time.
Thank you, Mrs. Smith. And the board did consider other terms. So if we would have gone for a 25 or a 30-year bond, it would have garnered either $210 or $220 million. And Again, some people may say, well, why not do that? You know that the need is there. Make that investment now. And really what we wanted to do again was balance the most critical needs, but also being very good stewards and not asking the taxpayers for more than we thought was appropriate. So again, just a brief look at planning for the 2021 bond. Really, we knew, again, when Mr. Francis shared that when the initial facility assessment was completed in 2012, they had identified at the time about $275 million. So while the $195 million bond took care of quite a bit of that, and the sinking fund continues to fill in the gaps on some of those essential projects, we knew that that really would plant the seed for a bond at some point in the future. So we really took a deeper look at that beginning in 2019. When we were talking about the sinking fund millage, we really honed in on some of those three key areas, and then also instructional technology, and determined that that would be the focus. And rather than picking off various projects here or there, we would focus in on the roofs, boilers, and the paving, as well as the instructional technology, and then to begin to work toward planning for a future bond, and a bond when we could go for a zero tax rate increase. And so those discussions have happened over the past year and a half, and again more formally beginning this past fall with the board, and then the final decision in January. So what will we be doing? This is the exciting part. So we'll take a little bit of time now to go through and talk about what would some of those projects be. I will tell you that for our students and the folks who are in our schools each and every day, one of the highlights would really be to add air conditioning to all of our classrooms. I can tell you, it might not come up very much now when it is 10 degrees outside, but I can tell you if it was September or May or June, it's something we would hear on a daily basis. Have any of you ever heard that from your own kiddos? Absolutely. So with that, we know we can also do some enhanced air quality HVAC, which will always be an important element, and adding air conditioning to classrooms, labs, and offices. Facility improvements. So Mr. Francis, if you want to highlight any of those pieces, but as you had shared, we were able to do extensive upgrades in electrical, plumbing, restrooms, but we certainly couldn't do it all. There are many areas where we still have that need. And then really thinking through your library media centers. We did not touch those areas at all. So as we take a look at that, that's an area where we know we really want to get in and reimagine, redesign. Do you want to talk a little bit about kitchens?
The kitchens in our buildings, most of which have not been updated since the buildings were built. And our most recent building is, if my memory is on this one correctly, I want to say 1971. The Career Center was Eisenhower Elementary originally. So as you can see, our newest building, or our youngest building, is 50 years old. So the original items, they need to be addressed. We're talking about potentially things like exhaust air, makeup air units for the kitchens, and bringing the serving lines up to date, perhaps where possible. And we don't have a ton of space in those areas necessarily, but where possible, making the line that runs through more conducive, for student use and getting through that line better. Those types of items. Just essentially getting in both from a mechanical standpoint, but also where possible from a flow and space use standpoint, making those better. Anybody familiar with, say, Churchill's serving line? That actually was updated recently through the Food and Nutrition Department's fund, and it's a beautiful, beautiful serving line that gives both the workers and the students the ability to kind of branch off and get into different areas and have a little bit better flow. It's ideas like that we want to look to and improve on.
Thank you. And then the next section, really, we look at maintaining and enhancing our investment. Technology is certainly a big area as we look at mobile devices, the classroom presentation technology in all of our classrooms and our collaboration areas. The life cycle of technology is on a much faster pace than, say, a desk or a chair or even a school bus. So that is something on which we would like to continue a very regular replacement cycle, so we have the technology for our students that are needed on a daily basis. We talked, Mr. Francis talked a little bit about the athletic areas. We have some additional furniture and instructional equipment needs, as well as school buses and maintenance equipment. Now, we have certainly purchased a number of those, and we've replaced, I think, over 70 of our buses in the past 6 years.
Yes, through the 2013 bond, we did 66 out of our 110 buses, and in the recent years, too, we've also been applying for as many grants as we can to try to get some grant funding. I think the last grant that came through allowed us to purchase roughly 10 buses. We got 40% funding from the grant, and then our general fund picked up the other 60%. But as we look back at the 2013 bond, the buses, you know, were built in 2013, so they're quickly coming on almost 10 years worth of use. And we do put them through a lot with our Michigan winters and the salt and just the use that they get every day. So we'd be looking to start replacing some of those buses if this next bond passes.
So it's important if we stay on that cycle of 6 to 7 to 8 buses each year, perhaps up to 10. What that allows us to do is continue that replacement each year so that we don't have a fleet that all has to be replaced at one time, or even half the fleet at one time. When you have 110 buses, you need to stay up on that and continue that replacement. We also want to make sure that we don't have buses that are really beyond their useful life. We want to have buses that are safe, well-maintained, and ready to roll each and every day. Security enhancements. We were able to do quite a bit with the secure vestibules, with the cameras. What I will tell you is something we hear from our principals quite often is that we would like to add some additional security cameras, both internal and external to each of the schools. Elementary playgrounds, we made some great improvements there, but we have some older equipment that we still need to. Some of the larger playscapes that were put in prior, those need to come out, and probably another large playscape added to each school, as well as some of those single event items as well. Finally, we call these our future forward projects. How many of you have heard about some of these already? Yes, especially our robotics families, right? So we are very excited. We want to create, one of the main pieces is to really continue that STEM pathway. Continue that project Lead the Way offerings for our students, and find a permanent home, an appropriate home for our wonderful robotics program. We also want to take a look at enhancing our career technical education offerings. So there are some programs like our Med Tech, our criminal justice, and some of those programs that are really very, very popular with our students, but we have really outgrown some of that space that we currently have. We'd like to be able to add to some of those offerings and also take a look at what's next. What's next in the workforce development, in the field of work, that we can prepare our students for the future. And then we also are very excited about building an early childhood center. And possibly we've spoken about utilizing the Dickinson Center for that and creating really a state-of-the-art early childhood center for our community. So I'll pause there. Anything else we want to add to that? All right. So I'm going to let Mrs. Smith go over understanding the ballot proposal. One of the things that we wanted to be sure is just to take a minute. The ballot language is very dry, and it's not very descriptive. So we thought we'd take just a moment and just give you a brief description on that. I believe you also have that as a handout. And then we'd like to get a little bit of feedback from you on that piece. So I'll let Mrs. Smith take over from there.
Great, thank you. Most of the ballot language, we work with our attorney on it, and it really comes out of the Michigan compiled law. So as Andrea said, it doesn't get too descriptive, and it doesn't have the greatest flow to it. But it's what we work with the attorney on. It's what you'll see across, other school districts going out for bonds. What the language is that you see here. So that's why we call out on the right of it, trying to summarize what those, what the legalese means. So for the first one, that first chunk is really asking our voters if we can go out for a $186 million bond. Again, that would be money that would be coming, to us up front when we sell the bond, so that we could get started on those projects right away. The middle section is highlighting some of the projects, some of the scope that we could do with the bonds. So things like upgrading our safety and technology, improving and expanding facilities and program spaces for our academic success of our students, and then upgrading playgrounds and athletic facilities. And then down at the bottom is for informational purposes, and it talks about the mills and what that means as far as your property taxes go. And as we stated throughout the night, we are looking at not changing the tax rate. So the tax rate would be the same. So that would be what the bottom section is saying, that your tax rate wouldn't change if the bond passes, and then also spelling out what we can and can't use the bond funds for. So again, bond funds can't be used for salaries, can't be used for like textbooks. There's very clear do's and don'ts with the bond funds. So that's what this is for. As Ms. Oqua said, we're hoping once we wrap up here too, we want to get your feedback on, is this helpful, to see something like that, or if there's anything else that we can clarify on here that you think might make it easy or for people to understand.
So really, to sum up, what you will see on the ballot on May 4th, or if you are an absentee voter, you'll see it as soon as the end of March. You will see a request, this ballot language. It will be asking for your consideration of a 20-year, $186 million bond issue, a zero tax rate increase for the projects that we've laid out and identified based on our long-term facility plan. So that's the presentation, that's the general information that we wanted to share with you. You also have a summary of that in the brochure that you have in front of you that really highlights, especially inside, some of those projects and some of the key messaging and areas that we wanted to cover with you and with our community. Some reminders on the back about the important dates for both absentee and in-person voting. And then we'd really like to just open it up to whatever questions you may have this evening. So we have Mr. Francis, who can run around with the microphone as well.
If you have a question, raise your hand. I'll come over to you, Phil Donahue style. We'll do it that way. Oh, good. People laughed. I'm not the only old person here. Great.
Hello. So I have a question about something that's really exciting, bathrooms. Oh, yeah. So in addition to being on council, I also serve on the board of the Livonia chapter of PFLAG, a support group for parents of LGBTQ kids. And most of the families who join us these days have kids who are transgender or non-binary. And a very common question is, what do they do for bathrooms in the schools? I see restroom updates are on the list. Is it under consideration to add more gender-neutral bathrooms or to change the layout so that those kids have more than just one option? Like my kid, the only gender-neutral bathroom is in the office, and so far he hasn't had the courage to go in there. So is that under consideration? Are we too early in the process to talk about that? Do you need feedback from the community? Like, should our organization come and talk about what our needs are?
Yeah, thank you so much. I think that's a great question. And I will tell you, we are relatively early in the process, and yes, we would welcome your feedback. So a couple of things. We will have an opportunity to create some district teams that will, last time we had 16. We think that's maybe too many. We're going to narrow that down, but we did have district teams that included parents, that included staff from all different areas of our district, and we also had school-based teams. And so that is, whether it's a school-based team or a district team, we would absolutely want to have that input from you and from your group without question. Yeah. Yep, so we would generally create those teams once we knew if the bond was successful. So once the bond is passed, then we would begin creating some district teams to begin that broad-based work. We create the building teams or the building design teams once we are in the year prior to their summer of construction. So for instance, as we got later in the bond and some of those questions with regard to restrooms began to come up a little bit more, and I think they did, Mr. Francis, a little more toward the end of the bond, what we started to do was work with the individual staff at that school to identify some restrooms that could be unisex restrooms, restrooms that could be maybe not built from scratch, but renovated as such. And so some of those pieces were considered from the individual school level, but that's certainly something I think from a broader perspective would be appropriate at a district level.
So that sort of goes to my question was timeline.
Yeah.
So if it passes in May, then we're gonna have committees for a little bit, then when would like work or stuff start?
That's a great question too. So we hope this summer we would be prepared with some potential projects like some additional playgrounds. So we did a lot of legwork. I'm going to say we, it was mostly Mr. Francis and his crew, did a lot of legwork with the principals to identify playscapes, events, etc. All of that is still pretty current. So that's something, for instance, if we think we could get that together, those are things that we may be able to right away get started with. We would not be able to start an entire school-based renovation for the summer because we begin bidding those things out this time of the year. So we could certainly do things like technology purchases, bus purchases, perhaps playgrounds. So we definitely have some things in the back of our mind that we would begin some things in the summer of 2021, but construction would really begin in summer of 2022.
And a lot of it has to do with getting the architects, getting those types of construction managers, and then doing the actual, I want to say pencil to paper, but we all know no one's actually putting a pencil to any paper now, right? But doing that design, getting the input, then doing the design, then doing the cost analysis, and then the bidding, so that does take some time.
So one of the things we haven't decided yet, for instance, Kelly, is would we look at doing, 3 elementary schools, a middle school, and a high school each summer? Or would we be looking at perhaps like all 3 high school media centers and then all 3 middle school media centers one summer? So those are the types of timing and phasing is what it's called. A lot of that will be determined once we have architects on board and once we can begin that process. So there's a little bit of how much do you do before we get to the point of knowing, if the bond will be passed. So really the past year or so has been really focused on getting to this point, determining whether or not we would bring forward this request. If so, what would it cover? What would it focus on? What would the term of the bond be? All of those questions has really been our focus. Now this next section is really the informational campaign, and then we'll get to dig into the good work of planning for each summer.
Hello, long-time watcher, first-time caller. So in regards to the Early Childhood Center, is that in addition to Jackson Center? And what kind of programs, services? What about things like the GSRP program? And then another question, I know a big concern among elementary parents is the SAF program. Would that be something that facility could handle?
Yeah, those are all really, really good considerations. So a couple of things. We really believe that we have an expanded need in wait lists for many of our programs. And so at Jackson, for instance, our fee-based preschool, we also have our ECP program, we have Young Fives. We really have a need to expand and would like to expand the offerings for that. We also think we can really redesign the layout for that so that we can offer really a state-of-the-art experience from birth all the way through kindergarten. So we would really need to take a look at what makes sense to go under one roof, and can that all be done in one place, or would we still need to keep a satellite early childhood location? What would make the most sense? We also have some programs, as you've identified, whether it's GSRP or some of our other preschool programs at different school locations where it makes sense, and then they partner with that school community. So those really are some of the still to be decided questions. If we did not continue to utilize Jackson as an early childhood center, we definitely have some thoughts about how we could utilize that space. And one of the things I know that Mrs. Smith and Mr. Green have been working on is how can we make SAC as accessible as possible to as many families as possible, because right now at most of our schools we have wait lists for that program.
I just had a couple logistical questions.
Sure.
Is there anything else being voted on May 4th?
There is not.
Okay, so just the bond. And then I probably should have paid more attention in government class in high school, but if you register once as an absentee ballot, is everything from there on, or do you have to re-register?
So that's really a very good question, because you can actually mark either one. You can actually register to vote absentee for a single election, or you can become a permanent, and that's a recent development, but a permanent absentee voter for no reason. It's no reason absentee balloting. So it would determine what you've marked in the past. So you can do for either. You can be absentee just for this election, or you can choose that from now and now going forward.
You know,
Did that answer your question?
Yeah, so many people voted absentee, and then do people have to re-register again and vote for this, or it'll be, just so we communicate out to our parents, so they. Sure.
Yeah, and I just spoke to City Clerk Susie Nash about that, and she was explaining that while there is obviously many more now than in the past, permanent, quote-unquote, permanent absentee, because it's no reason, no excuse absentee, they are still the city of Livonia, and I think Westland would do the same thing. They're going to automatically still send an application, even if you just wanted to ask again for just this year. So if you're not already absentee, apparently they will send again if you wanted to.
And then, just my last question is, are you going to have signs available that we can get out to people to put out in yards and?
So that's a great question. And so another arm is if the development of a Say Yes group, which we cannot use district resources or district time or materials for that. But there is a group that is developing that would be able to address some of those needs, yes. What else is on the ballot?
Nothing.
Nothing
She
else
just
is on the
asked if
ballot.
there's anything else, this is the only item.
Yes, it's the only item in Livonia and in Westland.
Just one quick question. When we were talking about the field houses and things, I'm assuming that's all high schools. What about, just my own experience, like, what about Emerson? Their track probably could use a little updating, that space out there, but like, I get sad when I look at the baseball diamonds that sit there, understanding they don't have a baseball team, but will something be done with that land? Can it be even updated to be a baseball diamond that the community could use?
You know, I will tell you, we really haven't discussed that, so I don't want to necessarily speak to that other than to say that would be great feedback, for instance, for a district team or even a school-based team. We are able to utilize, we would be able to utilize these funds for things like the track or the middle school gymnasiums. We know, for instance, the gymnasium floors need to be redone. We've recently done some work in there, like the scoreboards and some other areas, but there's definitely need that exists at the middle school level as well. I will tell you, I don't believe we've had any dialogue about the baseball piece, but that's certainly something that if that comes up, we'd really have to weigh that against all the priorities that we do have and what could be done. We've also utilized some of our sinking fund dollars on athletic fields as well. So as you've probably seen at our high schools, the recent developments there have actually been done under sinking fund dollars. So part of it is really balancing the priorities and the needs that exist at each school.
Right, but I guess I don't have the microphone. So, no, I don't. Not loud enough. I guess my point is too that, like, again, I understand Emerson's not going to have a baseball team, but it looks so bad that it's upsetting. You know, it reminds me of being at Cooper, and I was stressed out for 2 years because the front, Debbie's going to laugh at me, the front flower beds drove me crazy.
Yeah.
And we spent 2 years trying to make them look better, and it just looks, I don't want to be prissy, but it just looks junky.
Yeah.
You know, we did a lot of beautification and it all looked so great, but then, you know, these sketchy fields at Emerson just look, I mean, if they're not going to be upgraded, it'd be great to just love them.
And I will tell you, I don't know, Mr. Francis, if you've had feedback on that. I will tell you that isn't something that was on my radar, but I'm glad you brought it up because that's exactly the kind of thing we need to be thinking in the back of our head. Again, some of those things don't necessarily even need to wait for a bond issue. So sometimes we can be talking about regrading an area and things like that that are not really necessarily super high dollar items, especially if we weren't, for instance, doing a turf field or something of that nature. Some of those types of things can be done as part of our regular maintenance. So even just sharing that with us is something that we can make note of, and you've got the right guy here to take note of that. So.
Is that school property
It is, and so it really only when you get very close to, yes, that it is not.
I didn't know if that was like, it's like at Grant, there's a baseball field there, but that's the city.
Right, right, yeah, right. Yeah, that is not the case. Okay. Boy, that must have been a while ago. Yeah, that must have been a while, and I've been around a while, so wow. Oh, do they? Yes, Mr. Testa.
I wanted to follow up on Mandy's question about the ECC.
Yeah.
So we won't need to use it, but I think it's a big
Are you
need.
sure?
Yeah, I'm sure. It's a big need in the community,
Yeah.
and it's can bring people in, attract people, retain people, and potentially draw money. So one of the interesting things, a word you used is infant or from birth.
Yes.
So will it be also a daycare? And
Yes.
The other maybe concern I have is using Dickinson, it might have people on this side of the district shut out, so to speak. So maybe a satellite chapter, or a satellite ECC might be worthwhile, or having two, one on each end. Dickens is obviously a good location because of the highways.
Mm-hmm.
And would it be open to other communities if there's capacity to draw those people in and to also generate money?
Yeah, that's really certainly one of the things that we would look to do and that we do now once we've met the needs of our own community. So we first open that up to our families within the district, and then if there's space available, we do open that up to neighboring communities and have agreements, for instance, with Young Fives with about 8 other school districts that do not offer that program. But we only do that after we've met the needs of our own families. So we would certainly be looking to do that. We also think that's a great way to introduce people to Livonia Public Schools, to have that wonderful experience as they do now with our early childhood programs, really begin to form that relationship with them early, and then keep them as a member of our school community for their K-12 experience.
Okay, yeah, that's awesome. I think many of our neighbors don't have daycare options through the schools. Is Dickinson going to be remodeled or?
Well, again, I'm probably jumping the gun just a tad in that Mr. Francis is nodding and agreeing with that assessment. One of the things that we would be looking to do is a complete renovation. We know that that's a school that is no longer really inhabitable. It would need to have significant renovation if it were to be opened again. Do you agree with that, Mrs. Yes. Yeah, well, in general, as far as the entirety of the school. But we think a couple things, that the property itself, as well as the easy access to get in and out of the facility, the parking, the types of things that you need to be thinking about if you think about an early childhood center, are very attractive. It is also a large facility. One of the things that we would want to do is be able to expand our offerings in our programming. We don't want to start already too small. As we've done some research in neighboring districts as they've built early childhood centers, they've started on a smaller scale, and already a couple years have outgrown and outpaced the development. So that we're really trying to think future forward in where the best location may be. So that's one of them that might be the most cost effective rather than starting, building from scratch.
And then on the other end, which we will use, the Career Tech Center, Career Tech
Yeah.
Education. The idea was to expand it for space, but would also expand for more capacity, because we also draw people in through other districts through that. So we'll be able to bring in more people to get more funding, or is it just to offer more to what we're already doing in terms of courses?
Hopefully a little bit of both. We've actually had to decrease the number of students from out of district for right now because we've had so much interest from within our own district. And again, that's another program where we will always put our students first and meet their needs. So we actually used to have quite a few students from both Northville and then some other surrounding areas. We haven't been able to take as many and it's been great to see that program just continue to receive many well-deserved accolades. But so probably a little bit of both. One, we need space for some additional space for some of the programs there. We also, in working with the folks at the LCTC as well as our manufacturing partners, know there could be a program or two that we do not currently offer that we'd like to add. So that one may draw additional students from within our district, but it may also draw some from outside of our district. And we would receive the FTE for those students when they're here.
We want to be respectful of your time. We know you have a meeting after this. It's almost 7:15, but we also don't want to short shrift questions. So we're taking the lead from you. Are there any other questions or comments?
Mrs. Jenkins?
I just wanted to remind you that if you did have something that you didn't want to say out loud or thought of during the presentation, feel free to leave these on the front counter as on your way out. If you have a question on there, please leave us your name and your email.
Yeah, we'd love your feedback. I mean, you are certainly key communicators, and it would be helpful for us, any feedback you have on the proposal, any feedback we have on the information that we shared, what should we share a little bit more about, what can we cover maybe a little bit less. We will not be offended by any of that, and you could provide us some really valuable feedback. So again, even if you don't fill it out this evening, but you want to fill it out at home, don't hesitate to either shoot it in an email to us, get it to Mandy or to me, and we'll be certainly willing to share that with our whole team.
On air conditioning, I think most people who are in the schools would be for it. I could see some people in the community against it. Is there any way to sell it as if we now have air conditioning, we can offer more summer programs? And also, would it help renting out more of our facilities? Are we losing like a church who wants to rent our facilities because in the month of July it's just so hot they don't want it?
Right, yeah, definitely. I should have mentioned the first one for certain. We really haven't talked necessarily about expanding rentals. We definitely have talked about the opportunity to expand some of our summer programs. Mr. Wenstrom can tell you that we utilize Buchanan a lot because it is the only elementary school with air conditioning throughout, or air cooling throughout.
Yeah, we get to keep that quiet actually, but no, it's true because Webster has to go there each summer as well. And if Webster was air conditioned, their extended school year for the students with IEPs that require that could stay at Webster for the summer, but rather every year Laura Boca moves that program into Buchanan.
And same thing, we've had our Title I camps and things, and we really are very, very limited, not only in which schools we can use, but which rooms at which schools. And I'll tell you, as wonderful as we try to make and engaging as we try to make those programs, it's tough to get some of our kiddos to want to come in during the summer. It's especially tough when it's very, very warm. We don't have air conditioning to be able to really meet some of those basic needs as well. So that's a great point, and certainly something we should be adding in our presentation. Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you so much, guys. You can reach out anytime with any questions you might have. Please jot us some feedback, and Mandy, maybe if you'll collect those at the end for any of the people that have turned them into you, and we'll pick them up from you. All right, thanks everybody. Have a great night.